Welcome back to Desk Talks. This is our second conversation that we're going to have. We're going to talk about transitioning. I am Chase. I am the COO here at Dynamic Educational Solutions, otherwise known as DES. I have with me today my brother and CEO, Rob. How you doing this morning, man?
Dude, I'm fantastic. The beautiful and sunshiny here in Texas, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Kansas City is looking beautiful this morning. It's about 80 and sunshiny and gorgeous here too. And, you can't beat that. It's a good day.
I feel like you're bragging a little bit, and I'm pretty sure the real feel here is probably over 100 degrees at this point. But I'm
That
glad you
that
have
was
your 80-degree weather.
that was a little braggadocious. Well, let's jump right in, man. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about transitioning from service. Rob, you want to kick us off? Let's talk about your transition first, yeah? You
Yeah,
transitioned
man.
in 2015, right?
Right, right. And this can be such a heavy topic for a lot of people, but I don't think it has to be. I think there's a really good blueprint out there for a lot of people, and I am not it. And so let's talk about that. So I did transition. So I was in the Army, active duty, transitioned in 2015. I was medically separated at the time, not medically retired, medically separated. I'm sure there's some out there. There is a major difference between the two, especially whenever it comes to your personal finances. And the honest reason that that happened for me, the medical separation over the medical retirement, is because I rushed the process. Uh, you know, I always wanted to stay in and make the military a career, right? I wanted it
Right.
to kind of be the end all be all thing for me and continue to work up the ranks and do because I loved my job. I was good at my job. But the second the Army kind of gave me my pink slip, I was like, okay, let's get out of here. Let's get out of here and move on to the next thing. And what I found is that was the worst possible decision I could have ever made. So I would highly encourage anyone, if you're on the precipice of that, get over the shock of, oh no, my career's over, but find that sense of peace within yourself to take your time during that transition. Go to the appointments, be open and be honest.
Oh, good gosh.
I think, I think,
Yes.
you know, I never, I would never personally, and I always tell everybody, you tell the truth, but you never embellish, right? So
Amen.
don't go into those appointments and then, you've never had back problems and all of a sudden now I can't even roll over in bed. I'm having trouble. No, no, no. But it's what you tell me all the time. What my wife tells me all the time. We get it. We know you're tough, but you don't have to be anymore. If you're experiencing that knee pain, you need to say so. If you're having problems, your hands hurt, whatever the case may be, before you leave the military, now is the time to make that known to your doc. That way, you can get those things on record now while you're still in service, and you're not having to get that added on the backside. Here in the civilian world, it will elongate your process if you don't start it while you're still on active duty. Uh, so I think I've kind of beat a dead horse with a stick there, but take your time. Take your time with the med board process, and also understand something. Chase, you and I've talked about a lot, man. Is there's no shame in being medically separated. There is no shame in
No,
being medically retired,
no.
and that's something that I know not only myself but others I've spoken with in the past. Do you struggle with that a little bit? You kind of look at yourself a little lesser, than your brothers and sisters who just transition and they're good to go. But understand there's absolutely nothing wrong with being medically separated, being medically retired, whatever the case may be. So just understand that for yourself. So that process for me, any wisdom I can impart goes back to take your time. Take your time, see the process out. Uh, you know, Closed mouths don't get fed. So
Amen.
if there's anything going on, you need to make it known. But that was kind of my process from the med board side. But I was also moving states. My wife Melissa and I decided to move from Washington State down here to Texas.
Because you were
Um,
at Fort Lewis, right?
I was at Fort Lewis, and that was a daunting task because I sent my family on in front of me. And they
Do you remember
moved.
about how far ahead of you sent them? Was
Yeah,
that was it
I
about
think it
three or
was
four
about,
months, right?
it was about four, yeah, about 4 months. Uh, my poor wife has, two infants. Our kids are 11 months apart. And so she was dealing with that in a full-time job. So, big shout out to my wife, Melissa, on that one.
She's
That was
awesome.
quite the task, but, you know, we talk about the transition. I know I'm not alone in that. You did something very similar,
I think a
sending your
lot of us
family.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think and of course you jump in anytime if you have any wisdom to impart here, but I will say, make sure everything's in order for yourself. Make sure you have the paperwork in order. That'll help you as far as any kind of, moving expenses that the military will pay for, what they won't pay for. Have a good game plan, understand your own personal finances. Because you talk about a strain. We owned a home in Washington and we were renting an apartment here in Texas for my wife and kids. That's
In
a
maintaining.
personal, yeah, that's a financial strain. So you need to have that, you need to sit down, you need to look at your finances. If you have the ability to months in advance. I know I didn't have that opportunity. I only had about 45 days from med board start to, going on terminal leave. But it goes back to take your time. But anyway, that was my transition. It all worked out. I knew what I was going to do whenever I got out. I was going to go back to school. I understood that. And so I had a general game plan.
Hey, Rob, real quick, let's back that up because I feel like
Yeah.
we're missing a big part of this, that transition. So you said you had about 45 days, right?
Yep.
In that 45 days of separation, not only were you going to like VA medical appointments and things like
Yep.
that, but you were then slammed on top and you had SEPs and TAPs, right? Like you
Yep.
had, ACAP, excuse me.
Yep.
Excuse me, Warriors. Not SEPs and TAPs anymore. It's, but
Yeah.
talk to me through that on Fort Lewis. What'd that look like for you?
All right. We're going to be very diplomatic here. SFL TAP. So Soldier for Life Transition
That's
Assistance
what it
Program.
is. Soldier for Life TAPs. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially what that looked like for me, to the best of my recollection, I'm sure I've blocked out quite a bit of that from my memory, but you go to the education center, I think for 3 or 4 days, and you're spending your time in the education center, in a classroom setting with, civilian instructors and vendors who are there. They help you with resume writing, which, by the way, help you with resume writing. My resume when I left the military was 3 pages long, and they told me that was a good one. I don't know any hiring managers who are going to look at a 3-page resume nowadays.
I don't either.
But, and I'm not trying to be pejorative. I think at the time people were doing the best that they could, with what they had.
Absolutely.
But, they kind of threw some college brochures at me. But I don't really.
Are there any services
think of,
that you wish you would have taken advantage of that you remember?
So now I can sit here and say from experience, at the time, I think I tapped into everything that was available to me. I met with the college advisors. And again, I think they did the best with the information that they could, looking at online institutions, looking at the for-profit institutions like University of Phoenix, Argosy, so on and so forth. But now having the experience that I have now, having worked in higher ed, as my second career, the knowledge that the only thing that I can say that I would impart on other people, anyone who's listening, if you're separating from service and you want to get back into education, don't pigeonhole yourself. Do your research, in-depth research. Look at quality of life. So workload compared to how much time am I going to have with my family? Because guess what, buddy? If you're married and you have 6 kids, you may not have the time to sit down and go through the rigor of a Harvard or a Yale. You may need to take a step back where the pace is a little slower. And guess what? That's fantastic. There's nothing Nothing
Nope.
saying that your education is less than those Ivy League universities, but interview those universities. You know, if you need to take a baby step, get into a community college and then transfer to a 4-year institution. But I
That's what we
will
did.
say that is what we did, and it worked out well. The only tidbit for me is I spent a little extra time at a community college and got my associate's degree whenever that wasn't necessary for me. And so it took about 4 months off my GI Bill that I could have used on my bachelor's degree because I ended up having to pay out of pocket to finish out my undergrad. Um, and I
That's
didn't
a
need to do
lessons
that.
learned. Yeah.
That is a lesson learned, and I didn't need to do that. But interview those institutions because just like anything else, you can almost create a virtual bidding war for you to come to universities. So, you know, look at the scholarships, look at everything, look at everything from a holistic standpoint, not just the curriculum that the institution offers. You know, and then if you want to get out there in the business world, if you're looking for a job, leverage contacts that you made while you were in the military and start that
Amen.
process. If you know you are going to get out in the next 18 months,
Yep.
start emailing, start calling, start texting, because I know from the Army standpoint, while you're on terminal leave, they can, or they used to, I'm pretty sure you can still do it. They used to give you additional time to go and almost intern at certain work, you know, civilian jobs while you were still on active duty, and kind of get your feet wet and get a feel for what, you know, that career is going to be like for you. So take
And of
advantage of
course,
that
that
stuff, man.
determines on, where you are, what duty
Absolutely.
station you are, your job title, that has operational tempo. There's a lot to that, but there is that
Yeah.
opportunity there. There's
Yep.
much like there's an opportunity that if you're 18 months out, you could actually get an early out release to go back to school if you get accepted in a program. There are a lot of different ways you can transition into higher ed or into a job. I know that's something that we could actually fill up a whole podcast with.
Oh Lord. Those are my tidbits, right? Take your time
Right.
in the process, leverage your contacts that you've made, and just have a good plan. Have a solid plan. Don't be
Write
afraid
it
to go to
out.
those. Right. Don't be afraid to go to the education center. Go to, you know, the education officer in charge. See if you can set an appointment with him or her, excuse me, and tell them what your plan is, because their job is to meet with you and be a resource for you. However, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't know the analytics off the top of my head, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's less than 10% of transitioning service members actually go to education officers
Yeah,
and ask
that
for
wouldn't
assistance.
surprise me either. I
Yeah.
think that would be pretty accurate, but we would definitely look up that. I mean, yeah, we could look that up.
Oh, we're gonna figure that out. We're gonna figure that out. But I mean that was kind of my transition in a nutshell. There was a lot of scrambling, things I wish I would have done differently. But you know, I think honestly, you're a resident expert here. You know, you alluded to it on our first death talk that you transitioned from the Marine Corps and then the Army. So tell me about that. So my transition from the Army, right? And
I
I've
do.
just told everybody else just a tiny little bit. So give us a tiny little bit transition from the Marine Corps. What was that like?
So I joined the Marine Corps and then I transitioned out in 2011, just after my wife and I got married. That was a decision that we made. We were going to
Mm-hmm.
go on the outside. We had a plan, but we didn't write it down. I didn't start reaching out to contacts until I had separated. I went on terminal leave. We just didn't write down a plan. We didn't work it through. We wound up
Yeah.
going back to Nashville excuse me, let me back that up. While I was in the Marine Corps, I went to SEPs and TAPS. That is the Marine Corps' version at that time for what the SFL TAPS was in the Army. So
Okay.
what we did, I was in 29 Palms, California. Shout out to all my 29 stumps people. But we were out there, and my transition was a 2-day course, if I remember correctly. Um, our SEPs and TAPS was a 2-day course, and there were 8-hour blocks, so 16 hours of instruction. We had to bring in a resume. My resume at that time was about a half a page long. I just didn't know. I was young and I only had, I didn't have that much experience.
Yeah.
So I thought they sat down, helped me get that half pager to a 3/4 pager. A lot of law enforcement came out and talked to us, offered us signing bonuses. I was interested in law enforcement at that time, so I talked to them. I kind of laser focused, because it kind of filled my background, and it was something I was interested in at the time. But I did not know, and nobody had really explained to me how police training academies worked and how you have to time those. That I would need something in between. I would need to, that it wouldn't be, a hop here to a hop in there. The way they made it sound in steps and taps whenever I was talking to the California Highway Patrol, but we moved back to Tennessee.
Yeah.
So it might have been different in California. Whenever we came back to Tennessee, I didn't start pulling those contacts till I was there, and it, the bottom kind of fell out for my wife and I. We wound up kind of bouncing around. I wound up getting a job in Smyrna at the Nissan factory. Hated it. Not nothing against Nissan, just was not in my personality type.
Yeah.
So my wife and I decided, we had a child in between there. We had our first child, our son Briggs. And then we decided to go back into the military because that she came from a military background. I loved my time in the military, so we decided to give it another shot. We went back in the Army. I was medically retired at the end of 2015 is when I started my separation. I was officially separated in 2016. This time, I had a plan. We had a daughter in between there, and so now we had 2 kids. My kids were young still. So we decided that whenever I got my med board started, whenever they told me, because I fought it for 2 years, I was just like you, careerist. I was going to see it through. I loved my job. I loved the people I worked with. And so whenever I got the med sep, it kind of hit hard. So I didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I did like everybody else did. And I said, okay, well, I'll go back and get my education.
Right.
But I didn't really sit down and I did not utilize resources enough to figure out what I wanted to do. So I started at Collin Community College and kind of worked my way through. It was rough. I used a lot of contacts. The first time I was literally just throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what would stick. I was calling everybody. I was so done with the military after my first, I did, time and an extension. So
Yeah.
I did just a little bit over. I was just so ready to be out of that military uniform and get away from it that I didn't go register with the VA. I did not go down and see a VSO. I didn't use any of those services the first time. The second time I used services, I immediately got involved with the VA, started setting up those appointments with the VA, got into their system. As soon as we separated, we went to Texas the second time from the Army. So I immediately got into it with the Dallas VA because that's where we were. I immediately started pulling on those resources, contacting VSOs, utilizing the college. College had a VSO there. Collin Community College had a VSO, and you and I went to college together there. We started together, and we utilized him a lot, and started really reaching out. And that's whenever our transition started going up. Is whenever we started reaching out, or my wife and I's. Our transition started trending upward is whenever we reached out and started using our services. I know a big one for me was getting involved in the Student Veteran Association. Whenever I transitioned from Collin Community College up to University of North Texas, shout out UNT Denton. And, I got really involved with the SVA up there. And that's whenever it just kind of clicked for me that, you and I started talking about deaths, and it kind of made sense as I started reaching out and using the community that was there and leaning on them and their experiences. I think my transition smoothed way out.
That's perfect. So hold on. Let's pause there, right? Because you said quite a bit here, and you are Des's expert for transitioning. You've done it twice. Maybe not so great.
Failed once, I do believe, and then successfully transitioned
I mean,
the second time.
I was gonna massage it a little bit, but okay, fair enough. We'll roll with what you said. Your word.
We did.
You failed the first time.
We
a
did.
little bit better the second time. But what I've heard you say, the first time you left, you didn't have a community to lean back on. It was just you and your wife against the world here. And the second time, you moved down to Texas, where I was, where the rest of our family was. You reached out, you contacted a VSO, you got involved in the community. Whenever you were at college, you were part of the SVA there at UNT. And so you had a support system, right? You had a support system the second time that made your transition a little bit easier. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes. Well, it made it successful. Good, bad, or ugly, it was successful. I stumbled. It was kind of ugly, how I got to success, but there was still success there.
Define that. I mean, and I think this is such a loaded question, and I think we should talk about it at some point in an upcoming desk talk. But you say successful. What, in your mind, for you, Chase, what's a successful transition from service?
My children got back into their education quickly. Okay. So schooling was not broken. It was a smoother transition into schooling. My wife had employment that was important to her. Okay. So my wife was able to find employment and was able to get herself into a routine, back into that life. Success meaning that I was able to, make positive movement towards employment and career readiness. I was able to lean on a support structure, let my pride fall down, and realize that I need to collaborate with others. I need to raise my hand, because just like you said, I say this all the time: closed mouths don't get fed. So you got to speak up. You got to raise that hand. You got to say, hey, I am struggling. Whenever I went back to school, it was not easy. School was never easy for me. But by opening my mouth and by raising my hand and saying, I don't get it, this is tough, I'm missing something, I was able to put those pieces together, and people came out of the woodwork and started. I got tutors. People, tutored me for free. Friends that awesome? We had tutored me for free in biology and chemistry, because those were weak subjects for me at that time. My wife helped me by encouraging me to go to the writing centers and do things like that. So by utilizing the services that were already set up for me, and the only thing that I would say about that is I did not know how to navigate those services, but starting to navigate those services and just tapping into them was huge.
For anyone that's not watching the video, if you're just listening, Chase taught in the classroom at the middle school level. I never taught, but I'm over here stomping my feet like an old school teacher. Pay attention. So if you missed the past 2 minutes, or if you blew past it, rewind the podcast 2 minutes, because I think, Chase, you just gave us some absolute gold, because you said it multiple times without saying it. Reach out. Nothing happens until you ask for help, until you ask for something. It's not just going to fall into your lap. It's not just going to roll around for you. There are people in this world, and I think I've been fortunate enough to kind of run into the right people at the right time, but nothing's going to happen for you in your transition until you stand up and say, hey, I need a little bit of help. And like Chase said 45 seconds ago, they come out of the daggum woodwork, because there's 1,000 people that want to help you, whatever anybody needs. All you have to do is reach out. And I don't think we said this on our first podcast, but I want to make sure that we hit it here. We offer a service for veterans. Chase has transitioned twice. I've transitioned one time. We've learned a few things in those transitions. We've vetted personally a few different VSOs, and then professionally we vet VSOs, ensuring what they say they're going to do is what they actually do for you. And it's absolutely free to reach out to us and have a conversation.
Yep.
absolutely free. And I promise, what you get here on these podcasts, this is Chase and I, maybe a little more dressed up than normal if we jump on a call with you. But understand that we've been there and we want to help. And even if we have a 30-minute conversation, you only take away 10 seconds. I mean, good Lord, you can grab gold in 10 seconds. So
Sure
I
can.
encourage you to reach out. We can get you plugged into our networks as best as we can. And I think we need to be realistic with ourselves whenever we do reach out for help and what we're trying to achieve, in that the best resource that we can provide you here at DES, as far from a free standpoint, which all of our consulting directly with veterans, it costs you absolutely nothing. We will never, ever, ever ask you to pay anything.
Ever.
We're just having a conversation. But I think the best thing we can do with you is get you plugged into our network. And then the onus is back on you to reach out, make meaningful connections, because that's where I personally have found success. And I think Chase would say the same thing.
Yep. Success and collaboration. That's what DES is all about. We tell our clients, we tell our partners, we tell every veteran that we meet. That's where Rob and I have found successes in collaboration. We got to work together, open and honest communication, let you know where you're at. That is the pathway to success, in my opinion. With that being said, thank you so much for everybody for joining us here today. I know Rob and I are super excited about this. We can't say it enough. How excited we are about these podcasts and about reaching out to you guys. We've had a couple people reach out to us already. Keep it coming. Make sure you jump on our website. Follow us on our socials. Okay. There's going to be events and stuff coming up. We're going to start pushing out some more news, more veteran news through our channels. We got good things coming up. So if you missed our first podcast, make sure you go back and watch that. That's going to welcome you in. It's just going to kind of bring the flavor of who Rob and I are. We are servant leaders, and I think that's what you're going to see through our podcast going forward. Make sure that you check back in with us next week for our third podcast, and we look forward to seeing you there.